Hello guys, welcome to another Academic Decathlon Microeconomics video. This video is going to be about supply, and I'm going to go pretty fast in this video because a lot of the same concepts are covered in demand. So if you have not seen that video yet, I highly recommend that you go to that one first, since this one is going to go a lot faster and less in depth than that one, assuming that you understand what's going on with demand already. So again, let's start how we did with demand, with the law of supply. And this links quantity supplied and price together. Remember, with the law of demand, that was price and quantity demanded to have a negative relationship. The law of supply states that quantity supplied and price have a positive relationship. So as the price is increasing, the quantity supplied is going to increase. What is this because? Same thing with the law of demand, it's because of opportunity cost. As the price keeps increasing, the opportunity cost relative to other things seems less and less. And so suppliers, they want to supply more. It's becoming a better opportunity for them as the price is increasing. And just like demand, you can do it as a supply schedule, which is just a chart of supply. But you guys already know how to make a schedule. It's just you put the prices against the quantity supplied in this case. So let's skip right over to the supply curve, which is, of course, the graph of supply. So quantity on the x-axis, price on the y-axis. And remember, supply, due to the law of supply, there's a positive relationship between these. And so the line goes upwards. It's an upward sloping line. And I remember supply is supply to the sky. So what are the things that can shift this entire curve? And remember, a change in quantity supplied is only really due to a change in price. It has really nothing to do with these four things that I'm going to mention. These four things that I'm going to mention shift the curve entirely, either right or left. Right for an increase, left for a decrease. So the first one is one of the most important. It's input prices. And these are just, how expensive is it for suppliers to supply? So for example, if you're running a bakery and suddenly the price of wheat doubles, then your input prices are going to go up. Your supply is going to decrease or shift to the left. Remember, decreases are always shifts to the left, and it would just look like this. The second one is technology. So using the bakery thing again, if suddenly there's this mega oven that's invented where you can bake bread at twice the speed for half the price, then the suppliers are going to become more efficient. They're going to be able to do things much cheaper. And so the supply will increase. As technology advances, supply will increase. So it'll shift to the right like this. The third is expectations. So for example, if you're a supplier and you think the market is going to go really well in the future, you're probably going to try to supply less, knowing that you can sell more in the future for more expensive and you get more profit. But if you think that it's going to be like recession or people aren't going to buy your product anymore, then you might want to try to increase your supply to sell more now, because in the future you don't want to have a bunch of stock sitting around. And the fourth one is the number of sellers. So just like demand, you add up each individual person together to find the market demand curve. Supply, you add up each individual supplier's supply curve to find the market supply curve. So of course, if there are more suppliers in that market, the number of sellers will increase, and thus the supply for the market would increase. Just remember these four things: input prices, technology, expectations, numbers of sellers can shift the entire supply curve, and that price only shifts the quantity supplied. Price does not shift the supply curve at all. Okay, now that we talked about supply, we can talk about something called equilibrium. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a graph of supply and demand. Quantity on x-axis, price on y-axis. So remember, demand goes down, it's a downward sloping line. And supply, it's upward sloping, supply to the sky. So since supply is upward sloping, demand is downward sloping, there's going to be a point where they intersect. And this point is called equilibrium. And equilibrium is a term that's used all over the place in chemistry and physics and philosophy. Equilibrium is basically a balance of forces. So in this case, the forces are supply and demand. It's where they intersect. And in a perfectly competitive market, or even just competitive markets in general, the market is going to end up at equilibrium. Why? Because let's imagine, let me draw another graph quickly. Okay, let's imagine the market price was above equilibrium, let's say here. Notice how there is more supply than demand. There's more quantity supply than quantity demanded, I should say. And this is called excess supply. And when there's excess supply, that means the suppliers, they can't sell all that they want to because people don't want it. And so what would suppliers do? They would lower their prices so that they can sell off all of their stock. Whereas if it was lower, you see, now there's more quantity demanded than quantity supply. And this is called excess demand. And so a lot of people want the thing, but the suppliers, they don't want to supply that much that all the demanders want. So what are the suppliers going to do? They are going to raise the market price so that they can sell off their stock for bigger profit. So in both of these cases, the market will return to this point, which is equilibrium. And in a perfectly competitive market, it'll just keep going up and down until it remains at equilibrium. And unless there's a force that'll change or shift the supply or demand curve, things will always just stay at that equilibrium price and quantity. Talking about shifts, let me draw another graph here. So let's say that there's a sudden increase in input prices. What would that do? Of course, that would decrease the supply because an increase in input prices means a decrease in supply. Remember, decrease is always to the left. So you have this supply curve, it would shift to the left. But what does this do to equilibrium? Notice that when the supply shifted left, the equilibrium price increased, but the equilibrium quantity decreased. So shifts left in supply will increase the price, but decrease the quantity. Now let's imagine if suddenly new technology was invented that made the suppliers more efficient. That would increase the supply. It would shift to the right, like this. And it would decrease the market price and increase the quantity. Let's imagine one for demand now. Let's say that all of a sudden we're in the market for hamburgers and people, all at once, there's a big hamburger craze. That would increase the demand. So demand would increase, shift to the right, and the equilibrium price would increase, but the equilibrium quantity would also increase. And the final example, let's say people think that they're going to go into a recession pretty soon. So the demand is going to go down because people want to save more money. So the demand will shift to the left, equilibrium price will decrease, equilibrium quantity will also decrease. So if a question ever asks you about a shift, I recommend that you go ahead and draw the graph, you draw the curve shift, and then you just look at the graph, interpret it, what happened to the equilibrium price, what happened to the equilibrium quantity. And here's just one last one. So let's imagine that the income for a normal good increased. What would happen? What would happen to the equilibrium price? What would happen to the quantity if the income increased in a community for a market for a normal good? I'll give you a moment to think about it. Okay. Well, if it's a normal good and income increases, then that means demand will increase. So the demand curve will shift to the right, and thus the equilibrium price will increase and the equilibrium quantity will also increase. I recommend, if you think about all the things that can shift the demand and supply curves, then draw the graph and then just kind of see what happens. Play around with it. Just get really familiar with this graph. I hope this all made sense, and thank you for watching. See you in the next video.